fall routine. What's come up lately with your clients about fall season change, back to school? I've had a few conversations about seasons change, but what's come up for you guys?
Yeah, I can I can go lots of clients. Just the conversation around transitional time is the fall change of season seems to mean like different things are coming up, different activities are starting or stopping, or starting to even get in. The weather starting to change, which is changing people's like outdoor routines. Even still, the transition of post summer, maybe vacation, holiday, like a chunk of time in between where it's like not quite fall, but not quite summer
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
kind of component coupled with school or work fiscal years. Yeah, clients are just feeling like they're out of routine. That's what I've been hearing lots of.
Yeah, pretty similar. Just back from vacation, back to work, back to school. Sometimes it's not just people with their kids going back to school, but some post-secondary students as well, trying to adjust to that themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely have been hearing the back from vacation, uh, school for a few people, but then the parents that I'm working with that have kids that are going back to school, and then, or I guess now they're at school, juggling more things. And it's always interesting with the change like that. It's like people know it's coming, but at the same time, they still are a bit blindsided by it. And I don't have kids, so I've not experienced that yet. So, but I know what it's like to be blindsided by something like this, even though if you know it's coming. Like, is that real?
Well, I can say from personal experiences, like I know it's coming. I know fall is coming. Try to get ahead of it, but even though with best intentions of trying to get ahead, we still come across those curves and those blockades that just didn't let that plan get through. So sometimes feels like a shock to the system a little bit, even though it's not much of a difference. It's a very weird transition
Hmm.
personally I've been finding. Um, and actually even some of my clients, which from a dietitian perspective, like their eating has already started to change into more comfort. We're seeing darker earlier. So that kind of already starting to want to like hibernate back inside is starting to happen too.
Hmm.
So I know we know it's coming. And I was thinking about this of, they say like fall back into routine, but I don't know. And actually, one of my clients said to me is just because it was a routine doesn't mean it's a good one to go back to. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's totally a fair point. So maybe it's not so much of trying to get back to something, it's an opportunity to be like, okay, this is actually a new routine for this set amount of time. Even though we know it's coming every year, it still might not be able to apply year to year. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so it happens every year, obviously, but it looks different. And I guess the people that you're working with, maybe more so the long term ones, but not even the long term ones, because the ones that you're currently working with now, obviously, work that you're doing in this time right now is going to be things are going to look different because of that too compared to previous years. So naturally, there's comparisons going on of what they've experienced in the past, and sometimes that can be positive, sometimes that can be kind of negative.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well,
And with what you said about people maybe trying to move away from routines that they feel are more not conducive to their health, there are some positives for some people in that they feel like it's essentially a new beginning where we can try to move forward from those things. So it's not always struggling with adopting the healthier routines. It's sometimes feeling that it's a good time to maybe drop some that weren't so great.
Yeah.
Do you find that that idea is kind of like taking something that's natural, that's going to happen anyway, and then just flipping it into something that you can use the momentum for something else, if it's nutrition or routines or whatever else? Like, do you feel like that's something that people do?
I think it is helpful for some people. I know that there are sometimes some stereotypes with things like maybe New Year's where it doesn't always work out, but there are some people where it feels like that new point in time that actually does help them with that initial motivation to try to change things. And then some people are, of course, able to maintain that. So it can be positive.
I know for some of my clients, the novelty that it adds can be helpful. I know for there's a group of my clients where the change and all the things that comes with it is kind of like just a big pain in the butt. But then there are some that when you spend enough time looking at it, you're like, you know what? Actually, there's this whole group of foods that I kind of either come back to every year at this time, or I'm just reminded of that are there, and it's more of a seasonal perspective, or pumpkin spice season, or any comfort foods, those types of things. So it kind of thrusts variety at you. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to actually do it, but so I think for some people it's a welcome change. And I know there's also clients that I work with wherein if they try and fight that and just like continue eating like summer vibe foods into the fall just because, and then they continue like fall off, not have success. But it's like they're fighting something that they should probably naturally change, and they're just not doing it for some reason. Yeah. What else has come up?
For the kind of the new hope, like direction, kind of like thinking positively about the change. It is a good time to stop and reflect, and clients have actually been doing a little bit of that, like maybe not so much what do we need to do currently, but more trying to think a few months out versus maybe trying to navigate the chaos in the moment.
Right.
So for example, one of my clients that I spoke to today had so much going on and they forgot actually about some of the good stuff that they were doing, but they couldn't really change a lot at this moment in time. But they were already planning for what could I do different to help with snow and ice situation when they weren't walking. So it actually just opened up an opportunity to talk about more some future planning versus trying to plan when there's just too much going on and the brain space isn't there for the right now.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of cool, right? Just circumstances wise, maybe there isn't anything different, but we can still think ahead for different situations when we're out of that chaos, stress, whatever it is.
I like that.
Yeah. I think that'll be a big one moving forward in terms of thinking ahead, like you said, for exercise, where some things are going to be a little more limited, something or less safe in terms of like ice and walking outside and such. So yeah, there are going to be more people who are looking for something that is viable with the weather, either indoors or something that is safe outdoors where they're not going to be too cold.
Yeah.
I know we talk with clients a lot about like planning ahead, having a plan usually means more successful. It's very kind of cliche. I mean, it's something that most people know when they do, they will be more successful with eating, not just eating, but of course that's our wheelhouse is food and nutrition. How would you go about describing that to somebody, or walking them through how to do that, thinking ahead, anticipating something coming down the road with a season change, especially with a lot of the chaos right now. It's easy to talk about and say that, oh, we should be doing this. It'd be a smart thing to do. What are some things that come to mind that are more practical? Like, how does that actually fall into place?
Something that comes to mind for me would be just thinking about past years where been through the season changes before, there are probably some recurring things that happened or some recurring roadblocks. And just writing that down and having that in a concrete form, and then thinking and then working with them to try to find some ways around some of those certain issues. So either working around the weather, working around what their schedule becomes in the fall, and just making sure that we identify those past issues so that that's a first step in being able to make some changes to address that and hope for success moving forward.
How would that be different than, because I know I've had clients that have just said, just tell me what to do. How would what you just said be different than having me or you or Andrea come into a session with a client and then just tell them what they should be doing?
Well, I think the key there is knowing what they have done and what hasn't worked, so that you can tell them, not, I wouldn't say tell them, but suggest some things that might be a better idea this time around.
I like it. Andrea, what do you think?
I think it's funny because yeah, we can plan with the best of them, and we, clients have big expectations of planning, right? Like, I'm just gonna plan for this to do this, and often they'll use words like, yeah, you know what, I should plan, or I should, figure this out. And I'm always really quick to say to clients of like, yeah, totally, we should all over ourselves, like, yeah, like we should do all that, but is it something of real importance, priority, or value? Like, we can, plan for everything, but if it's not something that's meaningful, I really will question whether we really should go down that road, or if it's I choosing to go down that road, right? So sometimes planning, good thing to do, but if it doesn't match the reasons why, value, it's just going to be another wishful thought.
I think that's a key point too, because with the season change, fall routine, a lot of the things that are happening right now, a lot of what I hear people is comparing to other people, or people talk to others about what they're doing, whether that's at work or parent groups or whatever else. And then to the point that you made, Andrea, about like, is it something that's they're actually going to be wanting to do? Which is like, there's reasons why we coach people that way, or instead of just saying, hey, go do this. Because if it's completely out in left field, yeah, it's a good idea. But if it's like outside of the boundary of what somebody can actually do or wants to do, it doesn't even matter. I guess it's just because the idea that has merit in a general sense doesn't mean that it's the right idea for that person.
And the expectation is a really big piece. And I know this personally from feeling as a parent, working with clients that have kids, we see all this picture perfect lunch boxes and, all the time dedicated to, fancy, beautiful lunch boxes. And the reality is that most people, like 99% of people, are not going to have the time to do that. But the expectation is like, oh, if you're, needing to go out there. So these self-perceived expectations, or what we feel we're expected to do, can really prevent that planning from moving forward. So managing what we're capable of. I've been telling clients lately and having to remind myself, like, lower expectations, because that can just help build motivation a little bit. If you're shooting for the moon, we don't need to. We literally just actually need to put our boots on. I guess you need lots more things to go to the moon. But yeah, you need to get somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with starting with that underlying value of why. Like, what is your why? What is your motivation for this specifically? And then, like you said, looking for something that's more of an intrinsic value there, and not so much, like you said, those other, like the other lunch boxes that you gave as the example. Something that comes more from yourself and something you'd like to achieve, some future goal like that, that is important to you personally. And then also, yes, not avoiding overwhelming them, starting with something maybe that's higher priority and starting with just that one thing, and not not going overboard. Because I have found that in the past, when there are some people who yeah, maybe they are highly motivated, but it's also important to remind them like we can do all of these things later on, but we can start with just some of these simple things to build momentum and go from there so that it's more sustainable and we're not trying to do a million things after an initial assessment and again just building.
Which is a common thing, I think, for these kind of milestone type days, or I guess weeks or months in the calendar year. We have these long lists of things and huge aspirations of what we want to do, and yeah, I like that point, Bamiro, about you gotta take it slow. Sometimes I feel like with my clients, like they're wanting to like sprint, and I'm like having to like pull them back and slow them down, and I have lost count how many times I've had to explain and discuss that with people about, like, me slowing somebody down would seem like a negative thing in their mind because they want to progress faster, or they want to change more things in a shorter period of time. Well, back to what we said earlier, if there's a lot of things going on, a lot of change in their life or around them, setting something within their boundaries of what they're capable of and what's realistic, I mean, it's just smart. And if we're working with somebody new, and we explain that to them and they don't believe us, then sometimes what I do with clients, I'm like, okay, let's do these 10 things and let's see what happens. And then we get down the road and they're like, yeah, you told me that this is going to happen. And I'm like, see, now you have this experience under your belt. You can remember when you tried to do it. Now, sometimes it will work, but probably most times it won't. And that's how it goes. I think the biggest thing is, how do we get around that? Because we want to not seem like we're always, butting heads with our clients, but still telling them what our honest opinions are about things and coaching them in a way that makes sense for them. Some people need things delivered softer. Some people need things a little bit more blunt in these types of situations.
Yeah. I think both of you hit on a key component of like the communication part of it, right? It's not that we don't want people not to do what they're wanting, but also communicating of, the steps and how it works and how behavior change is hard. And it's not just, trying to get everything done like off a checklist. It's trying to use that checklist to make sure we can keep going back to it consistently with whatever we put in. And I have also used the same strategy as Brandon before. If people think that they can take it on, like, I'm in no position to tell them that they can't. And sometimes we have a conversation of like, when was the last time that you did this and did that many things? Like, how did that pan out? And if they're like, oh, you know what, it was great, then okay, great. Like, let's try to replicate that. But if they're like, oh, you know what, no, that's what got me here in the first place, then it's an opportunity to discuss right back to what we were talking about, right? Like priorities and values and why we're trying to do this. And but there are people who can just take in and run with it, which is good. And it, and then we're ready for something, another barrier to come up, and we'll navigate it through that time. There are people who go through behavior change like that, for sure.
I think it can be a trust builder sometimes if I tell a client that, or I challenge a client to prove me wrong with something, because, like, if they try it and I didn't think it was a smart idea and they ended up doing it and it actually was successful, then I'm like, hey, prove me wrong, like, because then it's kind of like a motivating factor of sorts, but then also lets people know that I'm not afraid to have the client prove me wrong. Like, it's kind of fun in some ways. It lowers barriers a little bit, like brings the walls down a bit, as opposed to telling somebody that it's, if I know something is in their best interest genuinely based on what they've told me and the assessments and all this, I'm still not going to just be a dictator with it, and that's the only thing that we're going to do. Ultimately, even if something isn't the smartest idea based on what information we have at our disposal thus far, that's not the only thing that matters.
Yeah. I usually do have this like little footnote at the bottom, especially for those people who want to just do everything, is like, great. If it works, great. And if it doesn't, it still doesn't mean we failed at this. And that's exactly why you're going to come back to the next appointment so we can figure out why to get it back on your list again. So also removing those words too, right? Of, oh, I didn't do it because I didn't get the, 10th thing done. Well, that's okay still, right? It's not a failure. It's we just bit off more than we could chew. That's okay.
Fair. Yeah. So is that potentially a strategy to help people move a bit away from thinking more binary or all or nothing? If you break it down enough to have, instead of having your goal being something that was the 10th thing, like breaking it into at least a little bit more pieces such that you can monitor your progress and you will know if you got 50%, 75%, 90% of the way there. And then you'll realize that, oh, this wasn't a complete failure because that is wildly inaccurate based on the data that we have here. But if you don't actually break it down like that, and the only thing you were aiming for is whatever number 10 was, and you forgot everything else, or you didn't even break it down, and the progress you made so far will be so arbitrary that it won't be the focus of it. And you'll just be like, no, I didn't get there. And that equals fail, which is wrong most of the time.
And I think I was reminded this of a client this week, and they were talking about just like, they were preparing for my appointment ahead of time because they were just going to tell me all the bad things that had happened in this whole month since our last appointment. And they were leading up to it, and they had talked to their partner of like, oh my gosh, I have to go into Andrea and I have to confess and I got to tell her all these things and how everything had happened. And so went into that appointment, and the only thing I asked them was, what was something that you did well? And by asking them that, they had to stop and not think about all the things they didn't do. They had to actually then go, oh, but I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. And I was like, so remind me again why you were coming up with all of the things you didn't do when you forgot to check in on the things that you were doing. Right? And I thought that was pretty cool because they were so worked up about the appointment of all the terrible things they had to tell me that they didn't do. And they forgot actually there was about like 15 things that they did do. And they forgot about everything about that because they flipped to the didn't do versus the things they did do.
That's interesting.
Interesting.
I've seen that before for sure. Always curious when that happens, but when you start unpacking it and you get to that point, and then you see the tension and the weight on their shoulders just lift a little bit. And yeah. I mean, hey, that's part of what we do, is that exact thing. Sometimes not even completely related to nutrition. Sometimes it's goals that are kind of related, but that thing right there is worth spending time on, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from my clients who have done weight management strategies, quick strategies, because it's very all or nothing, black or white. So if they didn't accomplish one thing, then everything else didn't matter, wasn't part of that. So that was this issue of they had never thought about it from that capacity before. And actually there was really nothing that we needed to work through. Everything was okay. So it's also to recognize, where that thought process is coming from. Is it coming from something that they've just been trained to think, and asking them to think differently?
Yeah, I think it's important to praise those achievements and also to point out that bias sometimes where we're thinking more about things that we didn't achieve versus things that we did. And just emphasizing that so that they know that there were some areas of success. There are some areas that were challenges, but it's not all challenges and all things that we weren't successful at.
definitely.
Accurate.